is a good crowd in a good part of the world, and I'm very excited you guys had me out here, so thank you very much for that. The good news, well, let me start off with, the bad news is that there is a lawyer standing between you and your next meal. So, bearing that in mind, I will try to keep this on time, and I have to get back to Stillwater, so I get to drive back to Stillwater in time for class, and the kids will be so disappointed if I'm not there on time. I promise I'll get you guys out of here in a timely fashion. And I know that most of what I'm going to say today is kind of me preaching at the choir, because if you're here at this conference trying to learn more about these issues, you're thinking forward, and that's good. And the previous speaker, I think, did a really good job of outlining not only the opportunities that lie with us in the energy industry, but some of the challenges as well. Our use of energy, its sources, its production processes are going to change. And so for those of us in western Oklahoma, the Texas Panhandle, where the resource base is the driver of our wealth, whether it's agricultural, petrochemical, now we're seeing it with wind and solar, it's resources. And so ownership and management of that land drives everything. Now, I come at this from the agricultural side of life. Like Chris said, I'm an agricultural law professor, and so most of what I do is teaching farm families about this. But if we think about that, those farm families aren't just managing agricultural assets, they're managing our petrochemical assets as well. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today, I want to kind of evoke your thoughts about the trends in how we go about transitioning the current ownership of our asset base to the next generation, because we're facing an incredible inflection point. I would argue it might even overshadow what the previous speaker was talking about in terms of our energy usage when we talk about our land ownership. I'm going to hold off on that for just a second. What I want to talk to you about is why we're really bad at this. Why are we terrible at successfully transitioning our assets from one generation in agriculture to the next? And if you read through the literature, you can basically break it down into three overarching causes. Number one, it's just a failure to plan. And how many of you had a teacher, a coach, a parent, somebody in your life say, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail? Well, guess what? There's a reason they said that, because it's true. And I'm going to explain, especially in estate planning, when we're talking about land assets, why not having a plan is absolutely a plan to fail. But the second piece is insufficient capitalization. Now, I know this may come as a shock, so I'm glad that most of you are sitting down. If you have heart conditions, you may want to tune out this next part. But did you know that some farmers and ranchers prop up their operations with off-farm income sources? It's true. And yet, when that farm transitions to that next generation and everything heretofore has been operated in a black box on a need-no basis, and trust me, son, you don't need to know, all of a sudden you realize this thing wasn't really viable standing on its own as an enterprise. There was a collection of land assets. There may have been some mineral and renewable assets, but weirdly those cows were not paying all the bills, okay? And as that generation transfers, there's complete transparency at that point. All will be laid bare. And so now you start to figure out, oh, we didn't have a business. We did have a collection of assets. But those assets don't have more value together than they would if we just sold them off separately. So really the sum was not greater than the whole of the parts, right? So there's that. Then this next challenge is twofold. It's a failure to prepare the next generation properly. And I can most succinctly sum this up with a tale that was told to me by my colleague Dave Gaylor up at the University of Nebraska. He was doing an estate planning program. Afterwards, a gentleman comes up to him, looks to be about 70 years old, and he says, Dr. Gaylor, when do you think it's appropriate for the most senior generation to let their kids have some say in management? And very innocently, Dr. Gaylor says, oh, are you thinking about bringing your kids on the operation? He's like, no, I'm the kid. His dad was 92 years old, still drove out to the field every day to make sure he was doing it right at the age of 70 and had never had any say in the operation at all. So number one, we're really not giving the next generation a chance, and I get it. If we're invested in one stock, our portfolio consists of one company, and that's us incorporated, you tend to be pretty uptight about that management, and you think no one else can run this operation as well as I can because I've had all the operational experience. Yeah, because you've been hogging it. You haven't let anyone else have any operational experience at that. That's one facet of that problem. But the other facet is, if we're giving the farm to that next generation, do they know what they're getting into? And that goes back to what we were talking about a little bit before in terms of the insufficient capitalization, but do they know what asset value they've got? Do they know what rate of return it's capable of generating? Do they know what it's going to cost to buy out City Kid? Because City Kid doesn't want to have anything to do with the farm, but you split the farm up 50-50 with them, and now Farm Kid has to buy out City Kid. So you add those three things up, and we're doing really bad. Now, half of U.S. adults don't have any estate planning tools in place whatsoever, over half. But in agriculture, where the average net farm worth in the United States is $1.2 million, P.S. average U.S. household net worth, $86,000. Compare that in agriculture, $1.2 million. So you would think, being in such an asset-intensive business, we'd be all over this. False. Nearly 2/3 of us in agriculture have no estate planning tools in place whatsoever. And here in a minute, you're going to see why that pretty much dictates at least 2/3 of those farms get broken up at the senior generation's passing. The numbers almost perfectly mesh. But I'm also going to add to that, 88% of us in agriculture have no retirement plan. To which I will ask you this semi-rhetorical question: how many of you have met a retired farmer? Exactly, right? Farmers never retire. They just farm and then die. And that's pretty much how it works. I figured it out, though, because I've been at the university for a while. We have these creatures called emeritus professors. And they're professors that have been there for a while, then they're retired, and they just come back and teach the classes they want to, but they don't go to faculty meetings and they take naps. We do have farmers emeritus out there. They do the stuff they want to do, they don't do the stuff they don't want to do, and their retirement plan is, whether it's explicit or not, eat the equity in their farm. That's what sustains them in their semi-retirement. And then they wonder why when they pass that farm on to the next generation, it's on economically shaky ground. So why do you care about this? Here are the numbers, folks. You look at a survey of small family-owned businesses. This survey, by the way, includes farms and ranches. 30%, less than a third of those businesses are going to survive intact from the senior-most generation to the transfer to the next generation. You take that down to the grandkids, that falls to 12%. You take that down to the next generation, the great-grandkids, that number falls to 3%. So if I start out with 100 farms, by the time I get down to the great-grandkid generation, 3% of those farms are still intact as they existed when held by that senior generation. So we tried to figure out OSU, okay, we can see there's lots of challenges here, but what's really happening? And so instead of just speculating about it, we sat down and started doing the math. And so we set up a commercial farm. We set up a farm that had a big enough asset base that it could sustain a family full-time. It had one full-time hired hand working with it, and then we have a family tree of mom, dad, farm kid, and city kid. And we use Kansas Farm Management Association real farms to provide the financials and especially the income variability for our farm. So our farm has an average net farm income of $100,000 a year. I say average because we varied this over the 20-year span that we simulated our farm and gave it the same variability that the farms in the Kansas database had. I won't run too much through it. I would just say that it's a 50-50 cattle winter, so it's basically a winter wheat stocker operation is what we put together here. And it owns about 2 sections and leases about twice that much to keep itself operational here. So it's got its nice balance sheet, which is kind of what you'd expect to have an operation like that look like. I will tell you that we didn't have any short-term debt because there were enough assets, current assets, that if mom and dad passed away, they cash in the current assets, that pays off the current debt. But here's what we did. We figured out what are the most common strategies that we saw farm families using to try to get their farm from one generation to the next. And we ran it through 20 years of life, 500 times. So I would like to take a moment of silence for the over 10,000 family farmers, hypothetical, that we killed in this process. But their lives were not in vain, right? Every time that we had a strategy and that farm had a debt-to-asset ratio of greater than 60%, in other words, it was in farm financial stress as defined by the Farm Financial Standards Task Force, that's a fail. If they've got 3 consecutive years where they don't completely pay their operating note, we know the banker is going to cut them off at that point, that strategy is a fail. And then in strategy 5, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, which is a lifetime transfer, if we ever zero out mom and dad's retirement savings, that's a fail. It's not going to work. And like we said, we did this 500 times, and then we calculated what percentage of those 500 simulations did this farm make it. And the answers were kind of what we thought. Strategy number 1 that we evaluated is the one that lots of us use by default or by design. And that is split it down the middle. I don't want you kids fighting about this stuff, so what I'm going to do is you get half city kid, you get half farm kid. There, everybody's happy. Which, by the way, nobody's happy in that scenario. It's a recipe for disaster. But lots of people very consciously choose that because they don't want to talk to their kids about what they would really do with that asset. If I give you this asset, what you going to do? You know what city kid's going to do? Sell it. Because it's a stock to them, and a stock only has value if it generates dividends or if I can sell it to realize the asset value. And how good are those cash returns in agriculture at kicking out dividends? Yeah. Even if we have a good year on the farm, what's city kid going to want us to do? Distribute that income, okay? So at best, I'm setting up two people with diametrically opposed economic viewpoints, right? Farm kid wants to reinvest, grow the business, make it more efficient, increase returns to management because that's their economic incentive. City kid wants to sell the asset or at least have it declare dividends because that's their economic incentive. And if you make them share that, you've guaranteed fights unless you talk that out with them. So what inevitably happens is that farm kid is going to have to purchase the half interest that city kid got if city kid's willing to sell it to them, which is another whole issue there, right? By the way, if you don't have an estate plan, this is what you've chosen. Under the intestacy rules of Oklahoma and Texas, generally speaking, under most family trees, that's what's going to happen. You're going to wind up splitting kids with farm kid and city kid, even if you haven't chosen anything. Strategy 2 is a little bit more visionary and a little bit more swing for the fences in one way, in that you say, you know, I don't want to make farm kid share the farm with city kid, so I'm going to create a financial asset equal to the value of the farm. And city kid gets that, farm kid gets all the farm assets. So all you're going to do between now and the time that you die is just double your net worth. That's all you got to do. Easy, right? You can see there might be a little bit of a challenge there. You're thinking to yourself, okay, well, what's it going to cost to do these things? And I want you to know as strategy number 1, we're not talking about cost to mom and dad. It costs nothing to mom and dad. They're dead, okay? It's going to cost farm kid because farm kid's going to have to buy out city kid's share. And if you look at this, there are two approaches that we took with that first strategy. Number 1 was that farm kid has to go get a commercial loan to do this. He goes to Happy State Bank or the production credit office or whatever the case might be and say, hey guys, I need to buy out this other half of the farm. Given our farm's asset base in the first 5 years, that's going to take annual payments of $172,000 a year. Anybody remember what our net farm income was? $100,000. Do you see a potential mathematical challenge? Little problem there. We have no way of making those payments for the first 5 years, but after we've paid off the machinery, hey, guess what? Now the payments are just $86,000 a year. Remember, our net farm income is $100,000 a year on average. So there's going to be some problems there, I think. The second situation that you see there, that $89,000, we said, well, what if city kid gives farm kid a sweetheart deal and says, I'll charge you the federal minimum interest rate, which works out to be about 3% these days, on a 20-year loan. So over 20 years, our payments are just roughly $90,000. In scenario 2, Ma and Pa are basically buying life insurance policies or investing in some portfolio to make that happen, and you see that their payments are roughly the same. So right off the bat, you see we've got problems. It looks like we're not even going to be able to make this stuff work on paper, never mind any income variability. If we have some, down years, we're out of luck. And it's kind of hard to see here, so I'll just tell you the probabilities of these working are none. Like in strategy 1A, you always hit a fail condition. In strategy 1B, where you had the family loan, in one situation, you had a 4% chance of success. So you're saying there's a chance. And then in strategy 2, 1% was your best chance of success at any of that. And we wonder why we have such phenomenally low rates of farms successfully making that transition. You can't make your family buy something back from itself and expect it to sustain that. You can't do it. The math just doesn't support it in today's environment or any other economic environment, right? But let me show to you a more excellent way. There's actually a way that we can actually pull this off, but we have to stop buying stuff back from ourselves. So let's take a look at how that works. Now let's talk about a more balanced approach. In this case, in strategy number 3, we take land out of the equation. We're going to stick the land into a trust, and farm kid and city kid are equal beneficiaries in that trust. And if we want to have a third party manage it so there's no fights, okay, we can do that. But farm kid gets operating assets, equipment, livestock, machinery, buildings. City kid gets a financial asset, and maybe we've purchased a life insurance policy, maybe it's a retirement savings from an off-farm employment, something like that, but they get that free and clear. Farm kid gets operating assets free and clear. They share the land. The land receives fair market value rent from farm kid to operate it, and that rent is shared by the beneficiaries. It's a little bit of a pyramid scheme, right? Because farm kid is subsidizing half of their rent. But city kid is getting an annual payment. They are getting something pretty much every year, unless there's some really dire condition there. Strategy number 4 takes the radical step of recognizing, hey, city kid, you ain't done squat around here since you graduated high school. So why do you think you're entitled to farm assets? Well, because I have 50% of your DNA. Not enough. So here's the deal. In strategy 4, it's basically the same as strategy 3, except we either, in one way of looking at it, give more to farm kid, or we give a discount in terms of the value that's provided to city kid, because they really haven't had any equity at risk in this operation, haven't contributed any labor or anything like that. But what if there was a way of doing it even better? Now, here's where things get super radical, because it involves you, 1, talking to your children, 2, trusting your children, 3, treating your children like they're your peers. And I get it, you can't regard anyone as an expert that's, had their diaper changed by you. I get it, okay. But hang with me for a second. In strategy number 5, we said, what if mom and dad actually got some value out of the equity that they'd invested in the farm? What if they actually got to cash out? Because how many of us in agriculture just invest in our farm, invest in our farm, and invest in our farm, and the only way to realize that value is to sell it? And how many of you guys are willing to sell farmland? Yeah, not a hand went up in this room, by the way, when I asked that question. It's okay. My father-in-law has been telling my son never to sell the farm when he inherits it. He started telling him that when he was 2. My kid's now 5, still gets that message. By the way, farm completely bypasses me and his mom. This goes straight from granddad to kid, and we're like, thanks. Let's see what kind of nursing home you go into, man. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to let mom and dad cash out some of the equity, explicitly giving them a retirement plan. So, what we do is we put land in a separate entity again, operating assets in another entity, and we're going to pay farm kid. Farm kid, if they're working full-time on the farm, gets a salary. Now, you can think of this as an employee stock option plan, because he's going to get a paycheck from mom and dad. He will get the check and endorse it back to mom and dad, hang it back to them and say, thanks, mom and dad. Here's my check to buy 5% of the equity interest in this farm this year. Okay? So every year, 5% of that equity interest transfers from mom and dad to kid, and mom and dad are getting that check. So they're actually getting the value out of that. Now, as that happens, as farm kid gets more ownership of the entity, they get a bigger share of the debts. It's true, but they also get a bigger share of the income. Now, that's being offset to mom and dad by the fact that they are getting cash back that they could radically invest in an off-farm investment And I think I'd make a condition of this, by the way. Mom and Dad, you cannot buy farmland with this check. You must put it in a retirement savings vehicle of some kind, and no farmland doesn't count. I say that because as my wife was about to have our kid, we were in the same hospital as my great uncle, who at that point was 88 years old and was in had stage 4 lung cancer. So while Kara was waiting for her appointment, I went over to go visit my uncle. I walk into his room. He's on the phone. Guess what he's doing? Buying a new farm. And I'm like, Uncle Ira, I appreciate the optimism, but you might be giving great aunt some additional challenges with your estate management. Just putting that out there, okay? So, in this scenario, you've given both kids a choice, by the way. Farm kid is choosing to invest his salary in buying equity from mom and dad, but you know what city kid could do? The exact same thing. They could put capital in the operation and buy management units as well. They have a choice. They can buy in or not, okay? But at the end of all this, after mom and dad have passed away, they still have the land entity, right, the trust that they have equal beneficiary interest in. Same thing, entity pays fair market value rents to the land entity. That income's distributed to farm kid and city kid. So again, farm kids kind of subsidizing their own retirement, their own land access there. But this also equilibrates. Anytime mom and dad had to give money to farm kid, they give an equal amount to city kid. But whatever farm kid has paid for, they've earned. That's out of the pot now. So in terms of absolute giving, we are giving equally to farm kid and city kid, but farm kid's earning a lot bigger share of the farm asset base, okay? Now, you pile all this kind of stuff up, you start to see that there's a big difference here. If I were to draw a line there, all the strategies below that line is where we have taken land, put it in a separate entity, and it's under separate management, or can be at least. And we're basically just transferring operating assets. And I want you to look at the probabilities above that line and below that line. That farm cannot economically sustain anything above that line. But if you go below it, the lowest probability scenario you've got is 89% chance of success, with 20% income variability over that lifetime. Folks, that is game-changing. But you got to take the land out of the equation because the land is just not going to pay for itself if you're making the farm family buy it back. Here's the wacky idea. Once you've paid for an asset, stop paying for it. Just hold on to it. And if you want to look at this, look at the costs again. When we're not trying to buy out the value of the land from ourselves or from the next generation, and we're just trying to transfer those operating assets, the cost for these strategies goes from being in the hundreds of thousands to like the high, 5 digits, down to being $30,000 or less a year. It's much, much more viable, but you got to actually have a transition plan here. And if that's not enough, let me do it for you graphically. Here are our chances if we're trying to buy the land back from ourselves. Can you see those? Because I barely can, and I'm standing 10 feet away. Here are the chances if you take the land out of the equation and have a more balanced approach. That's what those chances of success look like. It's night and day. It's stuff we always suspected but never really could put our fingers on. So what I'm telling you is you've got to have a plan and a vision and an approach that involves all the generations. If you're willing to do that, we can really make it a win-win, and mom and dad can actually get some of the fruits of their labor and enjoy that in retirement, while farm kid has a clear path forward, has control over the assets that they need to manage that farm, and city kid has a choice. They can choose if they want to participate actively or not, recognizing that if you don't have assets at risk, you're not going to participate in those returns. And what I'm about to say is going to stab me straight in the heart. Recognize that. I'm city kid. Okay? I was raised a farm kid in the 1980s. Anybody remember how much fun farming was in the 80s? I do, because both my parents had 2 off-farm jobs to keep us out of bankruptcy. And my dad, one day when I was in elementary school, I can't remember exactly how old I was, sat me down, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Son, never come back to this farm. This is no way to make a living. You get a job with a steady paycheck inside, and don't ever think about coming back here." And it kind of stuck with me because I never did. Now, my act of rebellion was I became an ag law professor and tried to do this kind of stuff all day long, but I never did. Now, my youngest brother, Adam, missed that lecture and was actually actively encouraged to come back to the farm and was amazingly successful working with my dad for the time that he was working with him. So it was kind of different. But the thing is, give your kids a choice. Do they have a chance to buy in? If they have a chance to buy in, they might, okay? But you've at least made explicit to them, hey, this is why you're not being treated the same, is because you haven't done the same stuff. Treating you the same would be treating you unfairly. Think about that. Treating them the same is not treating them fairly. If you'd have given me the same share in my farm that my brother had, which my brother worked full-time on the farm and really contributed to its growth, that's not fair to him. And I would have said, yeah, this is really kind of unfair. I feel really bad taking this, but thanks. Just kidding. Okay. By the way, this works in real life. This is an actual farm that we were able to find data on going back to the 1930s. And every time you see a blip here, that's a time that a generation passed away and the farm was purchased back from itself. And you see on those blue bars where its net worth was, it was a little bit over $2 million into this term. Using exactly this farm's rate of growth, if you extrapolated that, that would be a difference of nearly $5 million if you kept the farm asset base intact. Now, I don't know about Canadian, but in Leedy, that's walking around money, okay? $5 million. So, what, Ferrell? Nifty. You did a simulation. You calculated some stuff. That's what you geeks are supposed to do in the ivory tower, right? Yes. But I wanted to have that example so I can illustrate to you the importance of what we're talking about here. So if this moves you in any way to kind of proactively tackle how we transfer our land ownership, our farms, and our petrochemical resources going forward to the next generation, what can you do about it? First off, recognize the clock's running, okay? This is a histogram of census data, and it's kind of hard to see. The bulges are kind of population. On this side, it's male. On that side, it's female. And where that box is, there's a bulge. That is the population of the baby boom according to the 2000 census. That's where the baby boomers were right there. If I notch it up a little bit, that's where the baby boomers were in the 2010 census. Guess what next year is? Hint, it's 2020. And where's that baby boom going to be? The census projects right about there. Now, a couple of things. You notice that this graph starts to narrow. That is due to something my friend calls actuarial inevitability, meaning statistically everybody's died. Now, if you've read your Bible through, you know a couple of people didn't. Elijah and Enoch just got snatched. And you're like, but in the New Testament, a few people died twice. So statistically, it balanced back out. So everybody dies. I also want to point out that this is the male side of the graph. This is the female side of the graph. You start to notice that at this point, the female side skews larger than male. If you need to figure out why, just get on YouTube. Girls never say, "Hold my beer and watch this," okay? So, for whatever reason. But I'm saying that also to you ladies because here's the deal. Statistically, 80% of widowed persons are female. Statistically, a widowed female is 3 to 4 times more likely to live below the poverty line than a married woman of the same age. And that is because women are the first victims of bad estate planning. Guys, if you don't do your job, the first person you're going to hurt is the person you've loved all your life. So, straighten it out. Go talk to your accountant and the attorney. I can't say it any more plainly than that, okay? So we care about that because time's ticking. And to illustrate that, I want to use this farm-owning family from back east. Now, mom's run this farm longer than anybody in her family ever has. By all accounts, she's done a pretty good job getting through some pretty dicey times. But mom's 93, okay? Now, Dad tries to help her out, but Dad's been in and out of the hospital. His health's been failing. He said, you know what, this past year, I announced my retirement. I'm hanging it up. That's because Dad's 98, but he's still kicking. Now, they could turn things over to their son, but guess what? Their son's 70 and has never had a day at the reins. He's been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and he's like, you know what? Never mind. Pass. I want to retire because I'm 70. Plus, kids shown some questionable judgment in the past, and mom's not really sure about that. So the alternative would be to hand it over to grandkid and just skip a generation, right? Kid's 37. Sharp kid, has always done a very good job with every responsibility you've given him, but he's never really had a day at the reins of an operation that's this big. So could he do a good job? Yeah, maybe, but he probably needs a little bit more growth. Now, these guys might be a little bit extreme just in terms of the acreages. I mean, they own 530,000 acres of farmland and Canada. But, you know, if I deleted the picture and just told you the roles and the ages, is it that different from a farm family you know? P.S. This is my family, okay? Number one, I actually am related to the British royal family, not that I'm wearing that out a whole lot, but we were the gardeners, though. Don't go too carried away. But this is my family, okay? I still have one surviving grandparent, my grandmother. She's 93. She is parent to my dad, who next year turns 70. Now, I'm older than the Duke here. I'm 43, but this is my family, okay? And if Grandma had said, no, son, I'm going to run this farm till I'm gone, Dad would still be waiting for his day, okay? This happens all the time, which is why you got to move. And you got to move because you're working with a problem in that you have an hourglass, but you don't know how much sand it's got. I mean, we all hope we live that statistically normal life, but we all know lives and where that doesn't happen. You don't have an unlimited planning horizon here, folks. You need to plan for what might happen tomorrow and what might happen 20 years from now. And if you need a further example of that, that's also me. Because a few of you in this room happen to know this individual who looks like me with a beard, okay? That's Brother Adam. He's the brother that went back and was farm kid. He was helping my dad, and while he was working with my dad, in a short period of 5 years, they quintupled the acreage they were operating. We went from about 1,000 acres to about 5,000 acres in the span of time that Adam was working with him. He was the heir apparent, and he was the bridge for my little boy, who's now 5, to hopefully go back to the farm someday because Uncle Adam was going to keep things operating and together. Except for the fact that on October 26th, 2017, Adam was killed in a farm accident. Working on a vehicle rolled over him. That's it. At the age of 31, he was about 3 weeks away from his 32nd birthday. And I mean, and that's completely changed everything. Because now what do? Like there's no one coming back to the farm. You know, for years, the problem that I dealt with was what if we have one kid coming back and one kid doesn't? Folks, what I see all the time is that nobody's coming back. And so an important piece for us to figure out is if nobody's coming back, how do we handle our asset base? Are we going to give it to our kids? Do we want to sell it? Do we want to give it to our kids in some form that it retains its agricultural use, but they get some revenue stream from it? How do we as resource managers, whether that's in agriculture or the mineral industry, deal with absentee landowners who have no idea what they own, no idea how it works, no idea how to manage it? Folks, I'm in the education business. We're about to all be in the education business as we try to educate those new asset recipients what they're supposed to do with the stuff they've got. And there's going to be lots of opportunities for people that are less than scrupulous to take advantage of that. There's lots of opportunities for people that can be scrupulous to really provide tremendous value to those folks if they can approach it the right way. But we're all doing this for that next generation, right? And this is my little Pistol Pete here. So that's what I do for is, right, to make sure that guy has the best possible future. Okay, I'm going to skip past a few slides here because we've really kind of hit on several of these points. I just want to get to this slide right here. Remember, equal is not equitable. They're not the same word. And so treating an off-farm heir like an on-farm heir for the sake of equality is missing equity, okay? You got to talk to them. You have to make them understand what's involved in your operation, what kind of asset they're about to receive, and if you want to have an active role in this, it's time to ante up. Push those chips on the table. If you actually want to receive some of this asset base, you need to have some equity at risk. Otherwise, you're going to get a gift, which is exactly what it is. It is a gift, meaning it is an unearned receivable of property. Unearned. You ain't earned squat. But you'll get something because we love you, right? Well, whether we actually do or not, we're going to say it. I love all my kids equally. I can say that because I got one, okay? But I do want to say this too. Who needs to have a transition plan? Everybody. I don't care if you're Adam Ferrell and are an unmarried single person. Having a transition plan sure would have helped those of us that are still alive a lot. Okay? Him having some life insurance to pay off some debts that he still had because he was a young guy growing in his asset accumulation. Gosh, if he'd had some life insurance, it'd have paid some stuff off pretty quick. Okay? Everybody needs to have a plan. Young families especially. Because if they lose a wage earner, does it hurt in a much different and much more severe way than if we lose somebody who's got everything paid off. So young families with kids at home under the age of 18 desperately need to have their estate plans squared away. Cannot overstress that. For the same reasons, farms that are just on the verge of being viable, again, too, they're in a sensitive spot. Farms that have limited asset liquidity, which I should just strike all that and just say farms. Because they all have limited liquidity. Because what asset class makes up 86% of the U.S. farm balance sheet? Land. P.S. What's the one asset a farmer will not ever sell ever, no matter what? Land. And yet, by the way, farmers are always yakking at me about capital gains. I got to keep the land until I die so I get that step up in basis so capital gains doesn't kill us. Why do you care about capital gains if you're never going to sell the land? Exactly. If you're going to sit there and look me square in the eye and say you're never going to sell this land, I don't care about what your basis is because it doesn't matter. There's no gain unless it's realized, and you only realize the gain by selling it. If you're worried that it's going to be sold, okay, let's talk. Otherwise, forget it. So, that liquidity issue, and then, of course, complex families, the more step kids, the more step parents, the more marriages you've got, things just get a little bit more difficult to trace down. I'm going to leave you guys with a few things. I'm going to go through these 5 steps very quickly. Number 1, figure out where you're at. Do a comprehensive 360 look around your operation and inventory everything. Number 2, actually talk to the people that have a stake in this operation. 3, have a plan for how the business of what you do moves from one generation to the next. And after I die, you get it, is not a plan. That's a transition plan triggered by a completely random variable that only God knows and can control. You are throwing that out there if you just say, when I die, boom, this happens. Okay? 4, an estate plan. Everybody, and I mean everybody, needs to have an estate plan in place. And step 5, you have to recognize this is a process. You're going to constantly do this over and over and over again, okay? Quickly, inventory, all the stuff. All the stuff. And Haley and I were talking before the session about the fact that we see so many mineral owners and landowners that don't even know what they have. Aunt Mabel gave me some stuff. Well, what was your stuff? It was this piece of property that had a legal description on it. Cool. What's your fractional mineral interest? Right, so just, all right, breathe. What's everything that you own? But don't stop there. Who are your vendors? Who are your customers? You can't just swap people in and out of relationships. I want you to think about your relationship with your banker for a second. Can you just swap somebody into that relationship? Now you're thinking to yourself, if they had a better balance sheet, maybe, okay, but you've built that relationship with your lender over time. If you're into purebred genetics, you've probably got customers that you have relationships with. You have to inventory those and start warming those relationships up to who your successor is going to be. Who are the people that have an emotional investment in your farm? People that might care about what happens to the land, even if they're not going to be an owner. They might just want to be able to come back in the summer and swing in the tire swing and jump in the creek. As long as they know they have that access, they're okay with what you do. And then, of course, your goals and your values, because you shouldn't do business with people that don't have similar values. And yet, how many of you have been shoved into business relationships with people because you had the same parents they did? Think about that. Is that really a good basis for picking out your business partners? I'll tell you about my middle brother, Nathan. He's an oil field engineer in Midland, Texas, and has a lot of tattoos. A lot of tattoos, okay? He is a typical middle child. I'm a typical oldest child. We do not belong in business together. We don't, okay? And I love him to death. Love him. And he loves me. But we ain't doing business together. So having compatible goals and values matters there. You actually have to talk to these people openly, transparently. Here's the entire text conversation between me and my brother Nathan when his favorite baseball team, the Cleveland Indians, were playing my favorite team, the Boston Red Sox, and they swept us in the league championship series. Here's what I said to him. Here's what he said to me. Over 4 games, that's it, okay? Ferrell family, strong on that communication front, okay? We're really emotional, let it all out people. My wife's family, by the way, polar opposites. If my family on the emotional dial is at 1 and we're about to click off, her family went to 11 and twisted the knob off, okay? She comes to my family, she's like, I just worry your family doesn't like me. I'm like, they love you. They didn't say 3 words to me. Yeah, I know, that's really good, okay? When I go to her family gatherings, I take a nap just because that's my body protecting itself from the non-stop yakking that goes on all the time. And I'm like, it's just completely opposite, right? But the reason that I'm laying all that out for you is that you actually have to talk to these people about what you're planning and get their input, okay? So, let me back up for a second. The reason I have this picture up here is when does everyone have their family meetings? Christmas, because everybody's together. And how many of you have 0 stress holidays? But you know what? Let's take the most emotionally charged conversation we could possibly have, and let's drop that right on top of Christmas. That'll be good. What could possibly go wrong? Okay? Don't do that. What I'm telling you is that, yes, you need to have a conversation with your family and say, hey, I want to hear what you have to say. Honestly, I really do want to hear what you have to say about how you view the future of the farm and your role in it. And we're going to do this at a neutral site so that nobody has all the emotional authority in the room. Everyone can feel like they've been heard. And you'd be amazed at how much progress you can make when people feel like they've genuinely been heard. But if you have this conversation at home, what room of the house are you going to have your family meeting in? Kitchen table. Where does everybody sit? Where they always sat, right? Where dad sits at the head of the table, mom sits at the right hand of the Father Almighty, and you sit where you shove Cheerios up your nose, okay? And can your parents see you as an equal at that table? They cannot. Can you see your parents as an equal at that table? No, you cannot. Neutral field so that everyone can feel like they've really had an equal chance to be heard. Now, when we talk about this actual business plan, remember with our business assets, and in agriculture, there's a lot of conflation of those business assets with what are personal assets as well, and I get that. But for the business assets, we have a succession plan for how that business is going to move while we're alive to that next generation. For the personal assets, those are going to be handled by our estate plan. Everything has to have a plan to get it where it's going to go because your stuff is dumb and unmotivated. Meaning, it doesn't know what it's supposed to do with itself after you die, and it has no means of getting itself there even if it did. So every asset you've got has to have some legal instrument operating on it to pick it up and send it where it's supposed to go. And again, this is complicated enough if you've got a farm heir and a city heir, but if you have no heir, you might have to identify one, okay? And that could be finding a successor, finding someone you want to give a good deal to if they'll provide a good equity purchase arrangement for you. It can mean, you sell the asset base. Folks, it can be done. You can sell the asset and harvest its value. And I know that's an emotionally charged decision. I get it. But it can be done. If you don't like that, you can give it to a charitable institution, like, I don't know, the OSU Foundation or the 4-H Foundation or something. I'm just throwing random stuff out there. Churches, I guess they do good stuff too, whatever, right? But, charitable giving is something we're seeing a huge increase in because there are not heirs coming back to receive those assets. And there are even ways that you can do that where you can realize a lot of the value of the asset and leave a charitable gift for the organization of your choice, whatever that organization might be as well. So I'm going to move through that pretty quickly. Prenups, oh my gosh. All I'm going to say about prenups is if you want to have a prenup policy, it needs to be a policy for everybody. Meaning, don't tell this kid to get a prenup and not this one. They will find out. It will be awkward. Well, we were really worried about the one you're marrying, but she's fine, right? Okay. So do that. Figure out who's going to be making management decisions. And by the way, maybe one CEO, because there's a reason that ships have one captain, because if they were run by a committee, they'd be at the bottom of the ocean, okay? But I love my kids equally, and that's why I'm going to make all 5 of them co-trustees of my trust, and they have to agree unanimously on everything. Sorry, I just swallowed an aneurysm there. It's fine, everything's fine. I have one family that has 3 kids. One of them is a CPA. One of them is a retired school teacher with a lot of credit card debt. One of them is a retired social worker. They are all co-trustees on their mother's trust and must agree unanimously on every decision. It's a flipping nightmare. One trustee, one CEO. I'm not telling them to stick their fingers in their ears and not listen to what the other people that are stakeholders have to say, but one, okay? I love them the same, so I'm going to treat them equally. Stop that. I just want you to get that point through your head. I love them all equally. Cool. That doesn't mean that they have equal management. It just doesn't work that way. Every good corporation or LLC that you set up in the course of this needs to have a buy-sell agreement, and you always need to contemplate that someone might need out of the business, whether that is something that's involuntary, death, disability, divorce, debt, or if it's voluntary, we don't like the way they're doing business or they want out. You don't want to do business with someone who doesn't want to do business with you, okay? So always give someone a pathway out, even if you are just deadly concerned that this farm stays together and by gosh, this family is going to stay together too. I'm going to tell you this little maxim here. You can't control what happens on your farm after you die. I regret to inform you of that. Rigor mortis makes for inflexible farm managers. Just remember that, okay? So, I'm going to skip past this too because I want to get to your team real quickly. We talked about trustees. I got to get to your group of advisors, okay? Anytime something changes, anytime somebody's born, anytime somebody dies, anytime somebody gets married, anytime somebody gets divorced, anytime you acquire a major asset, anytime you sell a major asset, or just on a regular basis, check your plan, see how it's doing, revise. Again, this is a process that has to be adaptable. Also, get some professional help, for crying out loud. This is Leonid Rogozov. Never heard of Leonid? Weird. He's pretty popular. Here's the deal. Leonid was the surgeon for a Russian expedition to the Antarctic. While they were on their expedition, he got appendicitis. Who's going to remove his appendix? He is, because he's the one doctor they've got. So he gives himself a local anesthetic. He has a driver on the expedition hold one mirror, and he has the mechanic hand him tools, and he removes his own appendix. Why I'm telling you this is that you can remove your own appendix, but if you've got another option, choose the other option, okay? Yeah, you can do this stuff cheap if you go on LegalZoom.com, whatever, and download some forms, but guess what? If you're trying to transfer the assets that your families have worked to accumulate for generations, might you want to actually spend some money and do it right? And I'm not telling you to hire me. I took the oath of poverty when I joined the university. But there are good people out there that do this for a living. So talk to them. I don't care if it's the Dirty Dozen, if it's the Magnificent Seven, if it's the Avengers, Charlie Brown's All-Stars. You need a team, okay? And you need an accountant, someone who is well-versed in agricultural taxation and estate taxation. You need someone who's good at that, not just somebody that can grab a form off the shelf, right? You need an accountant, you need an attorney who's well-versed in business organizations, business planning, succession planning, and estate issues, again, focusing in agriculture because we have lots of weird stuff in agriculture that you don't see elsewhere. A production consultant to help you figure out, can I even do the stuff that I think we might need to do to get this farm over to the next generation? You need an investment advisor to maybe invest in some stuff that's not the farm, just to diversify your asset base and assure you of that retirement income so that you actually can afford to transition this thing to the next generation. An HR advisor to make sure that the right people are sitting on the right seats of the bus, that you actually have, your kids doing stuff that they are well equipped to do. And if they're not well equipped to do it, who do we need to get in there to do that? Last and certainly not least, the referee. If you're going to have a family meeting that you view might be a little bit contentious, hire a mediator. Hire a family communications consultant. Folks, at these family meetings, stuff comes out. And I mean, I either directly or talking to my colleagues, at family meetings we have had issues of sexual orientation, gender identity, sexual abuse, spousal abuse, emotional abuse, substance abuse, embezzlement, fraud. It's all out there. I'm helping one family get through a fist fight that was had between two cousins in 1954. Still working through that one. We'll get there one of these days, okay? But get somebody in there. Now, just have a plan to help you get through those tough times. And I'm going to leave you guys with this, and we'll actually try to get you guys to lunch on time. This is the Crable family. So this is Karen. She's a CPA. That's Fern. That's Wayne. They're the senior most generation. And the lady right there, that's Brittany. Brittany was my advisee. Who you don't see here is Jeff, Brittany's dad and Karen's husband. Jeff died of brain cancer in 2011 while Brittany was still in junior high. And that left Wayne and Brittany, because Karen had her own full-time practice, she was busy elsewhere, to run a multi-state irrigation operation and 5,000 acres of cropland. Wayne passed away on New Year's Eve 2016 of a tumor that was almost identical to his son's, which left at that point in time 21-year-old Brittany to be the CEO of this operation. And you know what happened? It was just fine. Because Brittany had been groomed from the time that she was sitting in the cab of that tractor at the age of 2, not just to be a tractor pilot, to be a CEO. They explained everything to her, and not just the how, but the why. And there was a plan for what would happen as people passed away for ownership to transfer, and it worked. And there's a happily ever after. That's me performing the wedding for Brittany and Logan. And now Logan is working at Baptist Hospital in Oklahoma City. Brittany still runs the corporation, and everything's going just fine. Just remember, you need to have a plan. Plans change, but you can plan for success. And with that, if I have talked too fast because I'm a lawyer and an auctioneer, that's the website where we keep all this stuff. You guys have been a fantastic audience. Thank you guys so much for having me out here today. I appreciate you.
Excellent. Any questions for Dr. Ferrell? We've got time. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule. Any questions?
They're all bamboozled.
Dr. Ferrell, I've always got questions.
Good.
Now, I'm a Texas Aggie, and I realize you're an OSU Cowboy.
It's really just the OSU of Texas, if you think about it. So
Used to be called the Aggies. But anyway, a lot of these people here are mineral owners. And one of the reasons we created this conference was to help mineral owners, not just people in agriculture. And your presentation was excellent. But one of the things that I've learned as a county extension agent here in Hemphill County is that the oil and gas production that represents about 2/3 of the base of our community, I'm talking about the tax base, are owned by mineral owners that live in faraway places.
Yep.
In fact, here's you an illustration. On my mailing list, I have about 250 ranchers that are in agriculture in this county. If you look at the tax base, we have almost 5,000 mineral owners. Some of those live in Europe and other places across the world. So would you speak for just a moment about the importance that mineral owners have to not only understand what their minerals are about and how that affects their estate, but also to take an inventory of those minerals and find out about it. One of our committeemen, where's Glenn Rose? Glenn Rose is on our committee, and he's an oil and gas man, now retired. And he's got 2 daughters. And one of the things he says in our committee meetings as we plan these conferences, and he said it rhetorically over and over, I'm trying to train my daughters what to do with our minerals once I'm gone, which goes right to what you spoke about.
Exactly.
So would you comment on some of that?
Those are fantastic points. And I will tell you this, one of the first things that I would start with, if you have any mineral wealth in your family, is mineral literacy. And I mean that very literally. What's the terminologies of the industry? How does this mineral stuff work? Because whenever I talk about this to my class, it's like speaking a foreign language to them. You know, do you understand that somebody might own the rights to use the surface, but somebody else entirely might own the right to explore for and produce those minerals? And they're like, no, wait, so they own all the ground underneath? And I'm like, no, they just own the right to look for stuff in the ground. And if they find it, they can keep it. Okay, what's a net mineral acre? I mean, if 4 people own all the minerals underneath a quarter section, how many net mineral acres do they have? What's a division order? It's literally just going through the language of oil and gas as kind of a starting point. But secondly, whenever I have students come back to me years after they've had my class, they always talk about 2 things. Number 1, that transition stuff you talked about, Ferrell. We've really had those conversations in my family. That's been good. And number 2, I'm really glad you gave us that stupid quiz about legal descriptions. You're welcome, right? But teaching your kids, what do we have? Where's the land? What's a legal description? How do I understand it? How do I read a title opinion in an abstract? But really just teaching them truly what they've got. Then once you've done that, teaching them, well, how do you manage minerals? How do I know what, 40 net mineral acres in Hemphill County is worth? How could I go about finding that out if I needed to? What's a lease bonus? What's an override? What's a working interest? There is so much groundwork to be laid, folks. It's like I said, we're all about to be in the education business because we have all of these people out there owning these interests, and they may be in Europe or LA or New York, and yet their wealth is integral to the success of our communities. And I really think, and this is more of a policy issue than necessarily a transition issue, we've got to be very proactive in reaching out to those people that own that mineral wealth and engaging them with what's happening in our community. Because if they're just getting mailbox money, what do they care? But if they know what's going on and how their management decisions affect this community, maybe they buy in a little more. And by the way, the situation is only going to get more challenging because we're just going to continue to see more fractionation of those interests. So we have in Oklahoma, we've now gone, I don't know how Texas handles it, our division orders now must go out to 10 decimal places. What's the number in Texas? Anybody know? Is it 10 too? But we have to go out 10 decimal places because we have such fractionalized ownership. Matter of fact, it got so bad in the mineral space. One quick anecdote. We actually passed a statute in Oklahoma that tied wind energy rights to the surface. They are non-severable. They are part of the surface estate. And part of the reason for that is the wind energy said, we don't want to see what happened to oil and gas happen to us. I don't want to deal with 48 landowners to lease a quarter section. I want to talk to one. I will happily send one check to that one landowner to negotiate one lease. And we don't want to have pooling and division and unitization. No. So engaging your stakeholders and helping them understand that mineral wealth, the potential that it has, because it can be substantial, it can be life-changing, but only if you know what it is. Because if you don't recognize its potential, I guarantee you there are plenty of companies out there that'll happily buy it for pennies on the dollar because you don't know what you got. So educate that next generation.
Any other questions? I'll come your way.
They're thinking food. They can smell it. There's blood in the water.
Going once, going twice. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you guys
Excellent.
again. I appreciate y'all so much.